It's Wednesday evening. Welcome to the programme. We start tonight with the ongoing efforts of police to crack down on an activity known as county lines, where organised crime gangs groom youngsters to transport drugs to areas out of London. It's emerged during lockdown. They were told to disguise themselves as key workers and delivery drivers to avoid detection. And a new report suggests more than 3,000 young Londoners are being recruited, with evidence they're supplying drugs to 41 counties across the UK. Our Home Affairs correspondent Catherine Carpenter has spent time with British Transport Police as they worked to dismantle one drug line between London and Kent.
A 5:30 a.m. raid in Rotherhithe. British Transport Police have intelligence suggesting the known gang member inside has been exploiting children to deal drugs.
Basically, you're under arrest for human trafficking.
A search reveals all the hallmarks that this address is being used as part of a drug dealing model known as county lines. The line is a mobile phone holding a database of drug users in a specific area outside London. The number is often owned by an organised crime gang, which grooms young people from the capital to courier drugs out of London and bring back the cash. Among their discoveries today, a taser disguised as a mobile phone.
She probes, and that will generate, you push the button and it will generate electricity, which they will then use to cause damage to somebody.
As well as finding mobile phones and weapons here, the officers are also going to be investigating whether the owner of this property was also being exploited. They think it's possible that he was being coerced into allowing it to be used for drug dealing. This new line between London and Kent was discovered 2 weeks ago by officers from British Transport Police's dedicated County Lines Task Force, which was set up last December to patrol the rail network. The trail began when a 13-year-old boy was making this journey from London to Medway. He was picked up at Rochester station with £1,500 on him.
Clearly a very young individual and lots of safeguarding concerns around him. So he was arrested and he was interviewed, and we clearly needed to find those individuals that were exploiting him into this type of activity. It isn't uncommon for us to interact with people of 16, 17 years old that have travelled 400 miles when they should actually be at school.
Since it was set up, BTP's task force has seized nearly £250,000 in cash and 476 mobile phones during nearly 300 joint operations. Many have been with Kent Police, which has identified 67 county lines running from the capital and often ends up responsible for the young Londoners trafficked there.
They'll arrive in Kent and they'll be tasked to supply drugs from a particular address or a car. We're working with our partner agencies such as social services, probation and the young offenders team, and generally they're teenagers who are vulnerable, have been exploited and sometimes often missing from London boroughs.
Last year, over 500 young Londoners were referred to the capital's Rescue and Response project funded by City Hall, the highest numbers from Newham and Brent. But there's no let-up in the tide of young Londoners flowing into Kent. Within minutes of arriving at Gillingham station, BTP officers stop a teenager with a knife in his waistband. And they've noticed gangs adapting, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic.
We saw an individual who was dressed as a key worker that had travelled from London to Hampshire to deliver drugs. And of course, if we do manage to push drug dealing and drug trafficking from the railway network, then of course it makes a 15-year-old less attractive to a criminal gang, because the only means of travel is then a moped, potentially, or hire cars, which means that those individuals need to be older.
The 13-year-old boy found in Rochester is getting specialist support, and the vulnerable adult at the Rotherhithe flat is also receiving help. The two people arrested there have now been charged with modern slavery and supplying Class A drugs, as investigations continue to dismantle this county line piece by piece. Catherine Carpenter, BBC London.